Good evening and welcome to our January Economic Development Commission meeting. It's Wednesday, January the 10th, 2018. And we have an agenda before us. We're going to start with some housekeeping, review the draft 2018 work plan, review the Sixth Amendment to the contract for private development between the Economic Development Authority and Burnsville Crossing, and any updates. So to start, can I get a motion to accept the agenda?
A motion to accept the agenda?
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody oppose? I didn't think so. In your policy, or your packets, you should have received the agenda or the meeting minutes from last meeting. Anybody have any changes, updates, adjustments to these?
Yeah, I just have a couple.
Faulkner?
First, my name, I guess there's an E between the K and the S. So
It's important.
that, if we get that changed, and then under the funding options, I did vote in opposition to that in the last meeting.
I'm sorry, Commissioner. I did not, obviously I misspelled your name all the time, but I didn't catch that either.
No, other than that, that looks good to me. So with those two changes, I would motion to approve the minutes.
Any other changes to add on? Okay, no, there is a motion on the floor. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody have an opposition? Nobody? So then I am going to hand it over to our Economic Development Coordinator, Mr. Skip Niehaus, to talk about our 2018 plan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Commissioner Folkstead, have I consistently misspelled your name?
It's always spelled right the first time. Then after that, it goes downhill. Spell check doesn't like the silent E in the middle
I
of the name.
apologize.
You're fine.
I apologize. Thank you, Mr. Chair. City policy requires that all of our commissions on a yearly basis draft a work plan. Staff has put together a draft work plan for the Economic Development Commission for this year, 2018. But before we get into that, I would just like to briefly review some of what was accomplished last year on your work plan. I think, number one, we obviously spent a lot of time on our comprehensive plan. And the economic development chapter in the comprehensive plan has some very, very good information in it, and that's obviously because of the time and effort that the commission put on that plan last year, and I know council is very appreciative of that time and effort that was put into the plan. We also spent a little bit of time at one meeting having quite a lengthy discussion about retail trends, and we have continued throughout this year throughout last year to look at different options with some of our retail areas that are under discussion apparently, and especially Burnsville Center. And then we did, at your last meeting, review some possible changes to some of our development tools, and had some excellent discussion there. And then we reviewed quite a few things. So you had a very active year, and we are very, very appreciative of that. For this year, the work plan that staff has drafted has a few items on it. First of all, a review of the Industrial Equities Development Contract. This is a carryover from last year's work plan. The reason that we did not address this last year is Industrial Equities has yet to secure a tenant for their building. Industrial Equities in 2016 purchased that vacant piece of property that sits directly across Portland from the Burnsville High School. This past fall and winter, they've gone in and taken the trees out and graded it and got it ready to market, which they are marketing it. We did create a TIF district, which you reviewed last year for them. As soon as they secure a tenant, we will be looking at certifying the TIF district and bringing a development contract forward to this commission for review and recommendation. So we've moved it into this year's work plan. The other item this year that we'll be looking at is, actually, it will be the next item on your agenda this evening, will be an amendment to the Burnsville Crossing contract, which we'll cover in our next item. We are also looking at developing an economic development plan. Staff has contacted some consultants and has requested a scope of work and a cost estimate from those consultants to basically facilitate this commission to help develop a plan. Initially, what we're thinking there is taking what we've done in the comp plan and possibly looking at how do we prioritize some of those items. As you know, there will never be enough funding to do everything at once. So we're hoping to look at some priorities of how we go forward. And then also, are there some other things we need to consider? We will probably around about May is when we'll have the consultant. And right now we're thinking that will probably be 2, possibly 3 meetings with this commission to basically kind of decide on what that plan is. And then we'll take it forward to council. I believe it was at your November meeting, it came up that you'd like to have a little discussion about incubators, so we have put that on your work plan, and we will, as we get in later into the year, have a discussion on incubators and see. And again, that might be something that also comes in under the economic development plan. And then our planning department is looking at a number of different ordinance updates that they may be doing in 2018. They will be taking some of those ordinance updates to council at their all-day work session on the 22nd, basically saying, here's some things we think we should be updating, or do we have the direction to do that? As those come out, any of those relative to business would obviously come before this commission for a recommendation also. And then on the kind of the ongoing section of your work plan, which we have every year, again, we will review the open to business plan a couple times next year with you. We will bring information on greater MSP for you to review. We will have our legislative agenda come before you, or at least the pieces that are relative to businesses come before you for comments like we have in the past. We are once again planning on some sort of a BECREC event. We do not know what yet because we haven't had the committee meet. And then we are going to be looking at this commission to now help with some of the implementation of the comp plan. And again, that economic development plan will be part of that. But we're looking that implementation of the comp plan probably will be on your work plan for the next couple of years on kind of an ongoing type basis. Mr. Chair, that's the draft work plan that staff has put together. At this point, we would certainly answer any questions you have, and then any discussions or additions or anything else that the commission believes they'd like to see on their work plan. We should certainly consider that at this time.
Well, thank you, Skip. That's outstanding stuff. Do I have any questions from the floor here?
I do have a question. I don't know how this fits into the work plan, but I was looking at the 2018 EDA proposed budget, and in there was a line item that included funds for the annual transfer of $498,828 to the AIM Center Fund for the payment of debt. I was just kind of wondering what type of debt is the EDA paying for on behalf of the AIM Center?
That is actually the construction debt, Commissioner. Little history. When we originally decided to build the AIM Center, one of the sources of funding for the construction of the AIM Center was something called a host fee. As a city with a landfill, we get a fee from the landfill for all the items that come into the landfill. As you're probably aware, recycling has become very big. Hence, the landfill takes in less. So our host fee is less. So we are transferring out of EDA funds money over to cover that deficiency that we don't get from the host fee any longer. And that transfer right now looks like it will continue until about 2027, and probably will be about the same amount of money every year until 2027.
Is the debt retired in 2027?
That's my understanding, Commissioner.
10 years.
Any other questions regarding the comp plan?
I have a couple. Just follow up on two items. One was the retail conversation we had. Is there a chance to follow up on that? And secondly, the development tools, which we're trying to develop. Is there a time in the year we could visit about those? Or will they be included in this economic development plan conversation?
Let me answer the development tools question first, Commissioner. The development tools that you reviewed at your November meeting are going to City Council next Tuesday for adoption. I guess, after they're adopted, I guess, my question would be, what after that is it that you'd be looking for?
A continued conversation, depending on what they adopt. If they adopt something of interest, then we can work with something, we'd want to have a conversation about it. If it's very limited, there won't be much conversation. So it certainly is a chicken for the egg, I know that. The council hasn't approved the tools yet, but in the event they do, we'll need to allocate some time on having.
So with that, I'm thinking that would fall under the economic development plan as we take a look at if there are tools approved, what those tools are, and how to prioritize their use. Is that what we were?
It could be, Commissioner.
Okay.
We certainly can, certainly if the commission wishes to further discuss those tools after they're adopted, we can. And how, I mean, the implementation of those tools, when we utilize one of those tools, it will come, that, whatever we're utilizing on, will come before this commission for review and recommendation.
Would it make sense to say that as we go through with the consulting group, et cetera, some of these tools will come up in those conversations, and then we'll be discussing basically that throughout the year? Is that basically what we're trying to say?
That, yeah, I mean, as we work through that development of the economic, everything is on the table.
Right.
Right.
Good. So part of it, I just want to put an addendum on to that conversation that we have a chance just to discuss the tools, so we're all familiar with them. Whatever the board or the council decides to approve, we just need to be acquainted with them. So as long as it's taken care of in that time, that's great.
Absolutely, Commissioner.
And then second, in the retail plan,
Yes.
will that also be part of the economic conversation? 'Cause
It certainly can
We
be.
had a substantive conversation, and I want to keep the momentum going because the retail space hasn't solved itself, last I checked, in the last 4 or 5 months, so we need to have a continued conversation about that.
Certainly, Commissioner, as we go through this economic development plan, retail will be a portion of that.
Super.
Mr. Chair, before you call for a motion, if I could, there is one thing I would like to add to your work plan. You may recall in your November meeting, we discussed that the council has changed their meeting time till 5:30. And this commission said that they would be comfortable meeting at 5:30. At that time, I told you that the thought was that council would want all the commissions to meet at the same time. Actually, council is comfortable with commissions meeting at different times. So if you want to continue to meet at 6:30, you can. If you want to move it to 5:30 or some other time, you can. If you want to move it to a different time than 6:30, we just need to add it to your work plan so council can take action and adopt whatever time it is you want to move your meeting to.
And that would be going forward,
Going forward, correct, Mr.
starting
Chair,
in March.
or Vice Chair.
Well, I'd prefer to keep it at 6:30.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I prefer to keep it at 6:30 as well.
6:30?
6:30 it is.
Thank you.
Easy one.
That doesn't have to change at all. Any other questions, comments?
Oh, I'm sorry, one more thing.
Sure.
I almost forgot. Our policy states that two of you need to be part of the BECREC group. So we do need 2 commissioners for 18 to be part of the BECREC group. Last year, Commissioners John and Copen, I believe you were 2 years in a row. Certainly, we can have more than 2, but we need at least 2. So if we would need a couple of volunteers.
Do I have any volunteers?
I'd volunteer to be a part of that.
Outstanding. Anyone else?
Jeff's not here.
Can an alternate volunteer?
I believe an alternate.
He's in real estate. Jeff.
Yeah, I guess you could. As you well know, Mr. Vice Chair, typically we have one meeting of the group to plan the event, and then
Right.
everything else is email.
Yeah. And I'm happy to stay on. Yeah, I mean, it'd be a good addition to have you with.
Yeah, if an alternate can be part of the.
Absolutely.
Absolutely,
Commission,
yeah.
We can have three, that's great.
Anybody else, or are we settled? With that,
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Now you can.
now we
You can have your
put this up for a motion. Do I have a motion? Or any other comments, questions, concerns?
I'll move to adopt the 2018 EDC work plan.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion to adopt. We have,
If I could, Mr. Chair, and I know that I'm splitting hairs here.
Yep.
But the motion is to recommend
Recommend
adoption.
adoption.
Thank you.
Of the 2018 work plan.
And I'll second that.
it's been there's been a motion placed and a second. Any discussion? With that, we'll go to a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Let's
Thank
move
you,
along. Thank you. Move on to our next order of business, which is to review the contract for a private development between BEDA and Burnsville Crossing.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Burnsville Crossing owns the vacant property that sits behind the CVS drugstore in the heart of the city. They actually own the property that CVS was built on. They originally purchased, if you recall, that used to be a TCF Bank building. The cost of the purchase and everything else was very large, and because of that, we did enter into a TIF agreement with them. The TIF agreement had, as all of our agreements did, had a construction commencement date and a completion date. The building of the CVS pharmacy was the construction start date. The land that's left over, the plan was to have about a 5,000 square foot retail facility. In order to basically build that facility, they pretty much need a tenant or tenants that are online and then willing to wait until the building is built. They have not been able to accomplish that. As obviously, since this is the Sixth Amendment, we've amended their agreement 5 times, and each one of those has basically moved the completion date further along. This amendment would move that till March 1st, 2019. It would also be the last time we would amend the contract because the TIF district in Heart of the City will expire in 2019. There is basically no financial impact to the EDA in doing this. So staff would recommend that the EDC recommend that the EDA adopt this amendment. And again, Mr. Vice Chair, I would stand for any questions.
And do we have any questions?
Now, was there a TIF on that land given?
We have never paid them anything.
Never paid them anything?
No.
Okay.
No, until they would build that retail, they have gotten nothing off of that.
Okay.
And they would get very little now, in all honesty, with only a couple of years left.
Are there any,
Just a quick question, is there a reason why they haven't been able to secure retail? Is it just soft retail environment or bad location, or did they offer any insights?
It's a combination, Commissioner. As it was noted in your background, at one point, they actually used the land kind of as the staging for when they built the CVS, so they obviously weren't doing anything at that time. The last few years, it's simply been, yes, finding a retail tenant and/or maybe 2 tenants that want to go into a facility and have enough lead time to wait for that building to be built, it just hasn't been in the cards. There's other retail space that can be, leased quicker than that. And banks are not yet back to the point in which they're going to give a on a spec building. So unfortunately,
That's what-
and a 5,000 square foot little retail is a little abnormal in the first place.
Right, it's a tweener, it's kind of in between a nice tiny little place and bigger establishments. So.
Now, it says here that there's no negative impact for amending a Sixth Amendment. Is there any benefit or positive impact for not approving the Sixth Amendment?
Absolutely none that I can think of, Commissioner.
And then looking prospectively, if the Sixth Amendment, if they don't do their construction and they don't meet their obligation of completion date, what happens to the land after that, the amendment after that?
Well, by that time, the district will be expiring, so
Yep.
there'd be no TIF that we would give them anyway, and nothing would happen to the land. They would continue to own the land, and at some point would hopefully either develop it or sell it.
Yep, so yeah, if they develop it going forward after 2019, they wouldn't have any incentive from a TIF
Absolutely not.
perspective. Okay.
Any other questions?
I'll make a motion to recommend, for the commission to recommend adoption of the amendment.
Commissioner Turner made a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. Brings us to the update portion of our meeting.
One update, as I've already alluded to in our discussion, the three development policies that we had amendments to, and the two new draft development policies that you all reviewed at your November meeting will be going next Tuesday night to council and EDA for adoption. As you may recall, they were originally presented to council in October in a work session, and council's consensus was to move forward with all of them, so presumably they will all be adopted next, at the next meeting. Just so you're aware, the recommendations that this commission made have all been incorporated into those possible policies, with the exception of two recommendations. You recommended that if an appraisal was more than 3 years old, that we require another appraisal. Staff is recommending that we not require another appraisal unless market conditions dictate a new appraisal, and/or it's determined that the appraisal is significantly out of date. And the reason for that is, the purpose of that amendment is to make it faster, easier, and less costly for a developer to buy some city land and move forward. So that's what staff will be recommending to council next Tuesday night. They've obviously seen your minutes, reviewed your tape and everything else. If council decides that they want to go back with your recommendation, they certainly can do that. And then on the renovation grant, the commission recommended reducing the employee headcount needed to get a grant. Staff is recommending that we keep the employee count as was in the original draft. The reason for that from staff's perspective is that if we're going to give a grant to a new Burnsville business coming to Burnsville, we'd like to keep it at 10 employees. That puts it in the upper 25% of businesses in Burnsville, and we believe council and EDA would be a little more comfortable incenting a business that falls into one of our larger businesses. Same thing with the expansion of a current business. You recommended 2, the original draft said 5, staff is recommending 5. Again, feeling that if we're going to incentivize through a grant for a renovation, that we keep it at least a little bit larger. Once again, this will be staff's recommendation at council next week. They have watched your meeting, they have your minutes, they know what your recommendation is. If they decide they want to go with your recommendation, that's what the policy would then be amended or changed to read. And I certainly would stand for any questions on the update.
Any questions?
Well, maybe this is the first time I've ever seen staff take a recommendation and then offer up an alternative to the council, so that it might not be the first time, but can I ask, my recollection is when we had this discussion, nobody from staff articulated or argued aggressively any of the recommendations that are being made. So, I don't know if it is I don't know when we say staff, if it's just you, Skip, or if it's a group of people, But if a group of people are gonna, on staff, are gonna review the proposal, and they're gonna have this strong of an opinion, it would be helpful to have them attend our meeting so that we can have the discussion. Because it seems like we discussed it, made a recommendation, staff's just gonna offer an alternative, which is fine. But I think it would give us better information if staff has some sort of background or perspective. I would want to hear it before I make a recommendation. I don't know if we heard all that. Maybe we did, maybe we didn't. I don't know, but when I read it, I kind of thought.
Your comments are well noted, Commissioner. What staff is recommending is what staff had in the amendment and the draft that was brought to council and to this commission. So we're not recommending a new alternative. We're recommending what was originally drafted.
Okay, any other discussions, questions, points?
Yeah,
Mr. Copley?
did council, on their preliminary conversation, they address or give any insight in terms of funding? Are they, will they discuss funding at the next stage then?
Part of the presentation, Commissioner, next Tuesday night will be EDC's recommended funding. You recommended $500,000 a year every year. That will be presented to council. And staff will be asking council for direction on that funding.
And is staff in support of that?
Staff is not supporting anything. Staff is asking for council's direction on how they want to fund.
Well, in this case, they took exception with two things.
Right.
I'm asking where
Staff
they
is supporting
stand.
something.
Staff is asking for direction.
So they're indifferent. Okay.
I guess, as I look at these two things, on one hand, the staff wanted to make it easier, cheaper, and faster for businesses to obtain a piece of land, and then on the flip side, on the next one, they wanted to raise the bar back up to make it more difficult to achieve the other incentive. And I guess I just feel that those two recommendations are a little inconsistent if we were attempting to make these transactions and/or incentives easier. I feel as though we should make them consistently easier to obtain or have the same tone to them versus raising one and lowering the other.
So noted, Commissioner, and we will certainly note those comments to council when we make our presentation next Tuesday.
So on the other three, and I'm not asking this to be confrontational, just so I have a better understanding of how staff is interpreting or reviewing the commission's recommendations. So are we to assume that for the other policies where we also deviated from the original proposal, as I understand it, that staff is in favor or otherwise doesn't oppose?
Staff, outside of these two, all your other recommendations have been incorporated into the amended policies and the draft policies that will go to council.
No, I understand. Well, all of them are gonna go to, the council's gonna see all of our deliberations, but these two in particular, staff is providing their interpretation or their position as to the policy. Staff is not providing their perspective as to the other policies. Are
Yes,
we-
we're recommending adoption.
Oh, okay, all right, so that's,
sorry.
and maybe, yeah, that's why I
Staff
missed
is
it,
going to be
so.
recommending adoption of the three amended policies.
So they're in
and
agreement
two
with the
new
other
pol-
ones, and
Exactly.
two is where there's okay,
Yes, Commissioner.
got it, okay, thank you.
So I guess the mechanics of the presentation then are they going to be presented to the council essentially side by side? The EDC recommends this, the staff has recommended this, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, in staff's, council's background, which has been drafted.
Okay.
It shows what was presented in October, what EDC is recommending, what staff is recommending, and we've gone through each one of them.
Okay.
If there's no other questions, that's all the updates I have, Mr. Vice Chair.
Well, thank you. I don't think this needs any kind of adoption or
No.
anything like that. And with that, we're set to adjourn. Somebody has said a motion.
Motion, I will motion to adjourn the meeting.
We have a motion to adjourn. Any seconds?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Didn't think so. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Good evening and thank you.
Commissioners.
Thank you.